What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Axioms On Trial. If you guys are just now joining us, please subscribe. Please help us out. Help us in the algorithm. We're a new channel. We talk about philosophy, anything with science. Sometimes we'll have some quantum physics educators on here. I'm trying to get Dr. Mark Goodacre for a show coming on here soon. We could talk about Q source and things of that nature. But if you're really interested in anything, religion, theology, philosophy, whatever it might be, please subscribe and hit the notification bell or all that jazz. Cease, how you doing, brother?
Doing great. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, this one's going to be cool. We got Tjump with us today. I'm just going to kind of go straight into it and introduce him in so we can just kind of get started and make this as smooth as possible. Tjump, how you doing, brother?
Pretty good. How are you guys?
Good.
Doing great.
Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I know you and Cease had some conversations and you came on a pretty short notice compared to a lot of people. It seems like we asked them and they're willing to come on right away, which is awesome for us. So we do appreciate that. I saw earlier you had a conversation with someone about the Quran, and I kind of just wanted to, before we kick this off, I wanted to get your opinion on the whole bee thing. He had presented to you that the Quran essentially had gotten something about 4 facts right about bees. Is that right?
Yeah. That bees store honey in their stomachs, they eat fruit, the women leave the nest, and honey is healing, something like that.
Sure. When I heard that, all I could think was, it seems that this is a pretty common thread with Islamic apologetics, is that there's this like Texas sharpshooter fallacy kind of thing where you're taking a cluster of data and trying to kind of fit it into your conclusion. Do you think that that's an accurate statement, or how do you view those types of arguments?
I'm not sure if it's a Texas sharpshooter, because it's just, I mean, the facts are correct. So I don't see a problem with saying that they got it right. It would be the follow-up that these are somehow special facts, because it's pretty mundane. Like, they're just random facts about bees. Like, there's nothing really special about that. Even if they were right, it's not particularly fantastic. Like, Hinduism made a fantastic prediction that the Earth is 4 billion years old. They're pretty close on that one. That's actually decent evidence. So, I mean, I'm happy to count the fact that Muhammad could predict some facts about bees. Like, sure, like that's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. The problem is pretty much all the facts he said are not original to him at all. So his case that somehow these facts about bees is special to Islam makes no sense. But his cumulative case argument that somehow that's combined with the fact that Islam healed people and had a scientific revolution is somehow evidence of God makes even less sense. Like, we could probably find lots of examples in history of people who made claims that happened to be right in science and also claims that were wrong, just like the Quran makes lots of incorrect scientific claims as well. And they were a part of a scientific revolution, like the Enlightenment cases or the Renaissance. I don't remember which one it is. I think it's the Enlightenment that Christians say is attributed to Christian thought or whatever. And that involved a scientific revolution. So all of those things are common among any religion that has a big enough population. I don't see anything special about this at all. I don't know how he gets to the conclusion of God other than the fact that, well, Muhammad did some special cool stuff, therefore God, I think is the argument.
Sure. Yeah, to me, it seems, I know that's part of, I guess, his cumulative case, but it does seem kind of odd that if that's an example, I'd find myself kind of pressed to use a bee example to prove something of such a extraordinary claim. There's something that I had put in here that I keep getting thrown at me by some Muslims that think that this is a verse in the Quran that basically shows that the Big Bang was predicted by them. And I think I have it queued up here. So it's, do the disbelievers see that the heavens and the earth were a closed up mass? I think they believe that is a ratquin. I don't know how to say that. Then we opened them out and we made from water every living thing. Will they not believe? Is that have you had that presented to you as the Big Bang? And what's your take on that very vague statement?
Maybe. I don't really remember everything that's been presented to me, but
Sure.
I think that the natural ambiguity of language means you can ambiguate any statement to mean whatever you want it to mean. So religious people do that all the time, where they take a quote from the Bible or any holy book and they vaguely interpret it to mean something they want it to mean and then claim that's evidence. But science doesn't really care about that. That's why you need specific predictions. It's got to like literally say Big Bang this many years ago. That's why the Hindu prediction is actually really good. Earth 4 billion years old. Like, that's pretty close. So it's the problem in religious people. They ambiguate statements to mean what they want it to mean because they already believe it's true. So but it's not evidence. That's why science doesn't accept that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and one last thing I think before I pass it on here to Cease is on Hamza's Den I've seen you on, and I hopped on there too. I got very, very flustered in that conversation. For me, it was unlike any other conversation that I had joined where my thought process wasn't even working, and I was assuming that's probably the tactic that they try to go about. But they started going off about how they came up with this the scientific method, essentially. Did you get? I didn't get to see your part fully in that. Did they get into you on that? And what's your take about, maybe even for the sake of the argument that they had, what does that imply for them, and why do you think that they think that holds such weight?
Well, I remember they made the claim that Islam made great contributions to scientific discovery, which is true. Like Arabic numerals were invented by Islam, and there's lots of Arabic discoveries like the stars. Neil deGrasse Tyson does a great video discussing all the different discoveries that were made in Islam at that time period. So there are definitely lots of contributions that did contribute to science, and so that's true in a sense, just like Christianity did have a lot of contributions that made to discovering science as well. But it isn't like solely based off of Islam or has anything to do with the Bible. It's just kind of like the quote you mentioned earlier, just kind of a vague ambiguation of, well, we're inspired by God, therefore, and invented science, therefore it's inspired by God. I think I brought up a quote from Ramanujan, the mathematician, in my debate with Nadir, that he attributed his great success of mathematics to a Hindu god giving him knowledge of mathematics. So people do that all the time. They have a belief system and they attribute their achievements and their work to that belief system. Like a football player says, praise Jesus, I got a touchdown, or praise God, he helped me find my car keys. Like that happens all the time.
Lucky socks or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
And I think to touch back real fast, the language thing is huge. What you mentioned, that's something me and Cease, almost in every debate that I come into, or even Cease's last conversation that he had, there was this question about numbers, and I think Cease might touch upon a question on this. I'm not too sure, but it seems like there's this misunderstanding of like what descriptors are, like a descriptive logic is, or how maybe the law of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle is formed. And it seems like I think I saw a Darth Dawkins thing where he asked you if you thought they were conventional, and these things, when they throw it out to me, it's kind of crazy that people can't see them other than descriptive, and that there's this prescriptive thing that they float somewhere in the world. I'm curious to see how you guys have a conversation about maybe abstract objects or something like that. But what do you think the hesitance is understanding how we manipulate language, logic, and those kind of concepts?
It's an anthropocentric fallacy. So they're comparing how humans come up with ideas to logic and math. So it's saying, well, hey, we thought up this idea of words and things, therefore they originate with a mind. And well, logic, that's also an idea. So it also has to come from a mind, just a bigger mind, a super God mind. And that's how they come to the conclusion that these things are grounded in a God's mind, which makes absolutely no sense. Like, even if this did come from a God's mind, how does it apply to the universe or to God before he thought of it? It makes no sense. I mean, clearly our thoughts really have no causal influence over anything, and they assume that, well, God's mind can cause stuff because God's all powerful. So he must have caused the law of logic when he thought of it. Because that makes perfect sense. Really? Not really.
Yeah, I like to throw out the idea that if you have just like two shapes, right, and it's just a universe of two shapes, the fact of identity is still going to remain regardless of whether or not you have the person to describe it. So I don't see the contingency on a mind from that perspective either.
Right. The question I like to ask is, well, could the universe be itself and not itself if God didn't exist? Like, is that a possibility?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And so that's pretty much it for me. I think I'll chime in if I have some questions on what you guys talk about. I'm really interested in to see you guys talk about the morality thing, but Cease, if you want to kind of take it away, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to just show you respect for, how patient you are often in this type of conversations that you've had with religious people, because I'll listen to the conversations and find myself getting so frustrated. Like these people don't know what they're talking about, and they don't know the tools they're using. Like they're just making linguistic mistakes left and right, and doing so arrogantly. Like when you went to Hamza's den or whatever it was, how calm you were able to keep yourself. I don't know that I would have been able to do the same. Facing that level of arrogance and ignorance. So that's the first thing. And I may be shooting myself in the foot here a little bit, because I would hope that at least someone like Jay might come on our show eventually. But your destruction of Jay and Jay Dyer's his name, right?
Yeah.
And Dyer Dawkins and some of those people, some of the most entertaining stuff that I've seen in this context. I mean, it's just I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was so funny to me that just the basic mistakes, just basic no understanding of logic, while talking like you're an expert. I mean, on one hand, you're dismissing experts in other fields, and on the other, you're claiming that you're right because you have a PhD. Like what? So
he has a master's. He has a master's in philosophy.
A master's, okay.
Yeah, I think it's actually in like humanities and philosophy, so it's not like an actual philosophy degree. But
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I was like cackling when he was holding up the whiteboard, and he's like, I think it was modus tollens or something.
Disjunctive syllogism, right?
Yeah, it was a disjunctive syllogism.
Well, he called it a disjunctive syllogism. Just disjunctive means or, but he didn't have an or anywhere on the
anywhere, right?
whiteboard.
Like, what are you doing? And like I said, like I would be fine with having him on. It's just that I often get trolls online telling me, if you're so smart, why don't you go debate Jay Dyer? It's like he's already been, frankly, humiliated on a public forum enough. Like, I'm fine with talking to him, but it's like I don't see the need. Like, there's nothing that I'm getting from that conversation. Like, this is someone who doesn't understand the material he's talking about.
I'll extend the invite to Jay Dyer. If you want to come on the show, you are more than welcome. We'll love to contribute more to that. So,
and look, can
I put on a beard and come on and like disguise myself as Jesus Mike, and I'll talk to him.
I would love that. Yeah.
So anyway, putting that aside for a second, I just had to tell you that because I've been watching some of the videos lately and enjoying them. These are a little bit general, but what are some of both the best and the worst arguments you've heard from the religious? Have you ever heard anything that's given you pause at all?
Oh God, the worst argument. Like, there's this guy who posts repeatedly on my channel. He just comments. He's going to pay me to do a debate. Like, I think it's supposed to be next Monday or something. But his argument is that shapes and colors prove the existence of God. Like, this is a new level of look at the trees. It's pretty hilarious.
Right.
Can't wait for that one. That's going to be hilarious. The best arguments, I would say, I'm not sure. Like, the best arguments, like, I agree with the argument from Contingency that there has to be some necessary foundation to the universe. And that necessary foundation could be an infinite regress of other universes. I'm fine with that. But there does have to be some necessary thing, some component to reality that existence is fundamental to. So I do agree with the contingency and necessity arguments. The most compelling argument would probably be the fine-tuning argument, the argument from design. Not because it's a good argument, it's not really a good argument, but it's simple and it's a very good rhetorical argument. So the argument in its strongest form is something like, DNA is a code, all code we've seen is made by a mind, therefore DNA is made by a mind. It's a straight up inductive argument, and it makes perfect sense. Like, all geese are white, or all geese we know of are white. The next geese we'll probably see is going to be white. Same kind of an idea. So that's a good argument rhetorically to use, and which is hard to debate in a form like online debate, because to counter it takes a lot more effort and intellectual know-how than just to propose the argument yourself. And that is one of the keys to making a very successful argument in debate, is that it needs to be simple, easy to understand, and anybody can get it just after hearing it one time. And the design argument has all of those properties extremely well, which is what makes it such a good argument in a debate format, even though it's completely useless in the academic format.
Right. No, I pretty much agree with especially with the fine tuning. I've always felt that it's a bad argument ultimately, but it's I think, the most convincing and compelling argument that I've seen from the religious. I want to touch on what you just said as far as the necessity component, because that's something that this might be my intellectual failing here, but I've never found that to be convincing. When I think of what is objectively true, I just think of what happens to be the case, whatever the state of affairs is. Why does it matter if it's contingent or necessary? Ultimately, what matters is what is the case, right? So why would it need to be one or the other?
Well, so by necessary, I just mean there was never a literal philosophical nothing. There was always something that existed. That's the necessary thing.
Okay, so the concept of nothing doesn't make sense. So whatever that something was, that's what we mean by necessary.
Right.
Okay, then I'm with you on that aspect then.
And that's essentially what theists mean too, by the same kind of an argument. Who's that crazy guy? What is this axe guy doing? Ugh.
I heard I heard he murdered you, but I'm glad
he
you're
tried
okay.
to, but I gave him COVID. So
I tried. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the way that theists mean it is that there couldn't be there always had to have been something, some foundation of reality. And then they go further and say there can't be an infinite regress, which I don't agree with.
Yeah.
But they're making the same argument. There could never have been a philosophical nothing where there was a literal nothing. That's what they always say. You can't get something from nothing or whatever. It's the same thing. They just mean you can't ever have had a philosophical nothing. So there always had to have been something as a necessary grounds of reality. And I agree with that. There could never have been a philosophical nothing.
Right.
I think that causes a huge problem in the sense of, especially if you're like invoking some kind of like cosmological argument where like everything has a cause, and then so everything has an antecedent cause. One, I would assume that'd be some weird form of like causal determinism. If everything has an antecedent cause, then it's not even compatible with libertarian free will. But worse than that, it seems that if you have this necessary foundation, if it was compelled to create, like, wouldn't that be contingent upon the thought, that's an antecedent cause before the actual instantiation of creation of time and all those kind of, like, I don't see how the necessity arguments works from their standpoint, because it seems it causes its whole own separate infinite regression.
Yeah, sort of. So their argument is that there has to be some necessary thing, and that necessary thing is just a brute fact of its nature. It just has a brute fact of it, the way it is. And the way it is such that it would create the universe as we know it. The failing of their argument is that, well, we can just say the same thing about the universe. The universe just is the way it is, and that's a brute fact. And then they're going to make some kind of argument. Well, that's incoherent. It has to be a mind of some kind, blah, blah, blah. But their argument essentially rests on the same trilemma that every knowledge claim does, Agrippa's trilemma. Everything either rests on a brute fact, foundationalism, infinite regress, just the cause thing you mentioned earlier, just a bunch of dominoes continuing to fall forever, or circular reasoning, the thing causes itself. Those are the only three options you have of how everything is justified from a knowledge standpoint.
Sure.
And so foundationalism is the preferred method for most philosophers, which could be a god. Well, it can't actually be a god, but that was one of the hypotheses, or just some aspect of nature itself. And that's where the theists fail, is where they think it has to be the god for some reason. It can't just be some aspect of nature itself.
My next question is, are you a naturalist, or like what is particularly your worldview?
Yeah, I'm a methodological naturalist, so I think there's only reason to believe natural things exist. There could definitely be supernatural. I think it would be really cool if there was supernatural, like if we could do magic like Harry Potter, or if their voodoo was real and we could channel spirits and cause lightning bolts to come out of the sky. That'd be really cool. And I don't think we have any reason to believe it. I think it's purely imaginary, or we only have reason to believe it's imaginary, but it's possible. So I'm a methodological naturalist.
Yeah, it seemed like you had that distinction on Hamza's. So they called me a philosophical naturalist, and I think that's what set me off, because I was like, no, I'm not a philosophical naturalist. He was like, all atheists are pretty much philosophical naturalists. And then that was part of the conversation I heard you guys get into on that. There seems to be this kind of there's not really good understanding, at least on that side, of what the differentiates a metaphysical naturalist or philosophical naturalist from a methodological naturalist.
Yeah, it's actually wrong. Most atheists do actually believe in some spiritual thing higher than themselves. It's very few are the naturalist kind. That's a minority.
Yeah. Cease. I think you're muted. No. There we go.
I think he's got a phone call or something.
Oh yeah, he's got something going on. No, it's cool. I can take over from there. It's fine. So I guess maybe touch on foundationalism there, because you mentioned that as an option. I'm more rooted into my major's computational biology, so I'm trying to get into philosophy more. I would never consider myself like a philosopher, but I think you and Cease have a really good understanding of that.
Yeah, I don't.
You don't? I feel
no,
like
I mean, just don't get into philosophy. Like, stay in an actual degree that actually pays money.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it's more.
Yeah.
I've definitely, I'm definitely. Cease is a philosophy major, but I'm not trying to. Yeah, I'm not
screwed.
I'm not trying to throw shade on him or anything, but it does. Those things do fascinate me. I do love to watch it. You take kind of Descartes. You would consider the cogito some form of that foundationalism, right? But you just don't use it for substance. There's a mind-body dualism, I think he's arguing for with it.
Yeah, there's epistemic foundationalism, which is what is the foundation of knowledge, and then there's ontological foundationalism, which is what is the foundation of reality itself. Mm-hmm. So I take the cogito as an epistemic foundation, that I'm an epistemic solipsist, which means the first thing that we can ground knowledge off of is I think, therefore I am. But I'm not an ontological solipsist. I don't think my mind is the only thing that exists. But in the context I was talking about before, I was talking about ontological foundationalism, where there is some foundation to reality itself, and that would be the God hypothesis, or just some part of nature. That was the kind of foundationalism I was referring to in regards to the origin of the universe.
Yeah. Okay.
So this leads well into the next question: is how do you define knowledge? Because to some extent, I think it's an issue of semantics, like how, it's, and also personal intuition. But from my perspective, when I think of knowledge, I think to just say justify true belief doesn't satisfy me, because it seems to me like, you can happen to be right and you can have a justification, but when I think of knowledge, I think of certainty, because it seems to me that certainty is epistemically unlikely, or I don't see how we could, even if we had that answer, how we would know we had that answer. I tend to sort of do away with certainty and instead focus on, well, what is it reasonable to believe given the tools and the condition that we're in, and say that even though we can't say this is absolutely true, it's still reasonable to take this position. So I guess I would call it reasonable belief as opposed to knowledge in that sense.
Yeah, I sort of agree. So the consensus in philosophy is that knowledge is fallibilism. So you don't need absolute certainty.
Right.
But I do totally agree that there is an intellectual distinction between having some kind of fallible knowledge and infallible certainty kind of a knowledge. I distinguish between those by calling one metaphysical knowledge and one empirical knowledge. But yeah, I agree that the kind of knowledge you're describing is essentially impossible other than the cogito. Right. And that kind of certainty kind of knowledge is what I call metaphysical knowledge. But I also agree with philosophers that you can have justified true beliefs, and that can count as knowledge. It's just fallible knowledge. I just call that empirical knowledge, like scientific knowledge. I still think it's knowledge. It's just a different kind of knowledge than the absolute certainty kind of knowledge. And I call it empirical knowledge.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I guess it's just a bit of an issue of language, how we define it. That makes sense. I'm curious to see what you say about abstract objects, given that you're a naturalist. Like, how are you conceptualizing or contextualizing that idea? Because usually when I hear about abstract objects, they're referring to things like geometry and math and that sort of approach. And for me, they just seem to be descriptors of relationships among things in nature. And I'm not sure where the abstract or where the non-physical aspect of it has to come in. Even language to me seems like I could break it down in physical terms without ever having to assume anything metaphysical there.
Right. That's called nominalism. Nominalism is the position that abstracts don't exist. They're just figments of the mind, descriptors, language kind of a thing. So yeah, that's essentially my position too. I don't think they exist either. I think
great.
Descriptions of the mind, mental language things.
Okay. So, I wanted to make sure, because I wasn't sure what your position was on that. I heard a few things and I was a little bit confused there. Okay. Well, what is the... Okay. Well, those are the only questions I had outside of sort of the moral conversation that I'm excited to have with you. So I guess I'll just jump in right into that.
Yeah, before you jump right into that, real fast, I just want to shout out to Murdershed Steve, Bit of Tea Danish, and there was someone else, but I can't read it anymore. It's gone on my end. And then also shout out to, I think Tjump's been working with Tart a little bit and doing some stuff on there. Go subscribe to that show. It's a really good show. But yeah, I just wanted to throw a shout out to them and to the people in the chat. So,
okay, so I guess I'll start this way. Could you break down? And I know you've done this a lot, but just for those that maybe haven't heard you speak about it yet, or just for the sake of the conversation, could you break down your view of morality and where you think it comes from and why, and then we can have a bit of a back and forth, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah. And I just want to say Tart is a great show. They do great work on English pastries. That's kind of the focus of their show. You should totally check it out. But yeah, morality. So my view of morality is that morality is objective. I'm a moral realist. Most philosophers are moral realists. So that means I believe that morality can be true or false. Moral statements are true or false, independent of opinion or humans or thought. So in order to say, well, how is it objective? That means it has to exist in some grounded framework independent of humans. And the way I say it exists is kind of like how fitness exists. Fitness is the property that certain organisms survive in more environments than others. That is an objective fact of reality. It's independent of human opinion or thought. It's a part of reality itself. And I think morality is the same kind of thing. Instead of an emergent property relating to how animals can survive in an environment, it's an emergent property related to how agents or conscious animals can interact with one another within a certain environment. So I think that it's a higher order emergent property is the technical term. You can find more detailed descriptions of it on the moral naturalism, the philosophy, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, moral naturalism. But yeah, so I think it's objective as a higher order emergent property, and that it can exist independent of mind. It can be true or false, just like gravity or any scientific fact. I think it's descriptive, not prescriptive. So I think that moral facts are true or false. Like if killing someone is immoral, that's just a fact. Like saying I'm 6'2" is a fact, and no oughts are required in it whatsoever. Oughts would be after the fact. You say, if it's wrong to kill, then if I want to be moral, I ought not do it. Or if it's wrong to kill and I want to be moral, I ought to do it. But the oughts are irrelevant to the fact of the matter. The facts of whether or not something is moral is independent of the ought statements, in my view. And the way I came to this conclusion was I looking at moral intuition and moral progress. Those are the evidences we have of morality, the phenomenon we're trying to explain when we're talking about morality. And we say, well, what is causing these? Maybe it's a subjective thing, purely human minds, evolution. That's a possibility. It's also possible that it's some objective law of nature, maybe a God grounds it or whatever. There's lots of different hypotheses to explain these two phenomena. Mine is that it's a higher order emergent property like fitness, just as a result of natural processes, natural laws of nature or whatever. And looking at these, we can try to make general principles that describe the commonalities between how it manifests in reality. And I think that the principle that can be used to describe what we see in moral intuition, moral progress could be described as any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. And that seems to be the principle that we can use that accurately describes all of what we see in moral intuition, moral progress. So that's what I think the objective moral principle is. And if we take that to its extreme, we can say the best of all possible worlds, the height of all morality, objective morality, is a world where there is no involuntary imposition of will, which I call the best of all possible worlds for all possible wills. That's essentially the summary of my morality.
So I'm left in a weird place because I agree with almost everything you said, but then from the conversations that I've heard and the ways in which I've heard you talk about this, you make certain steps that ultimately don't make sense to me. Which is, I agree with you that an imposition on will is immoral, but it's in the context of consciousness in which that makes sense to me. When you say things like, and correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm misremembering, but when you've described something like, if a train hits a person, that situation is immoral. Because the person who got hit by a train, obviously it was an imposition on their will. That's where I start to lose you. because I agree with you that it's independent of human opinion. But I think, from my perspective, it's grounded in what is true about phenomenology, what is true about consciousness as a mechanism that would be contained in the natural order of things. So I think often, so how would I say this? I think minds, and not just human minds, but whatever is able to experience, is contained in the natural order of things. So I fail to understand your perspective once it leads into a conversation about things that don't have minds, things that don't have intentions. How those could fit the picture of morality that you're describing, as opposed to just looking at it in terms of consciousness and phenomenological truths about consciousness in relation to well-being and suffering. So well-being and suffering are going to have a specific structure to them that we can discover scientifically, and that's how I understand morality to be.
Right. So the fact that nature can be moral or immoral is a conclusion off of a further argument. So if we look at what morality is, essentially, like, for example, the Sam Harris example of the Texas watchtower shooter, he had a brain tumor. So we think of someone as killing someone as immoral, obviously, but the fact that he had a brain tumor means he wasn't at fault. So he didn't actually do anything immoral there. It was really the brain tumor. But if we go more deeply and think of, well, what about a psychopath? A psychopath is someone who has a certain brain chemistry that causes them to not feel empathy or compassion or whatever, and so they'll do evil things. But once we find a way to cure psychopathy, like a drug or whatever, then it's essentially no different than the cancer. It wasn't that person's fault. It was really their brain chemistry, the neurology of what their brain was doing. So there wasn't anything immoral there if we take immorality to mean the conscious agent making some kind of a choice. All of the actions that we think of as moral or immoral are actually just different kinds of physical consequences of brain states making decisions that we see as impaired for some for some natural reason. So really, when we're talking about morality in these situations, we're talking about some natural state. Like, they're only immoral in the sense that their brain state causes them to be in such a way that it'll cause harm or suffering, if that's the way you define morality, to others without their consent. And once we cure them of that, they're no longer immoral. So it seems more accurate to say that morality really isn't about choice or conscious actors, but really things that affect consciousness. So things that restrict consciousness without its consent, for example. That would be what's immorality, regardless of whether or not it is conscious or not. So I think that the Texas shooter killing a bunch of people is equally as immoral, regardless of whether or not it was done because of a psychological brain state, a brain tumor, or free choice. And see, it makes no difference to me at all. I don't care. I think that the morality is a description of the effect it has on other wills, not the origin or intention of the will behind it, specifically because our advances in neurology show that really isn't a thing. It's really all just a condition that we can cure with some potential pill in the future, which means they are not at fault at all. It's really just a brain state. And the important factor to morality isn't the intentionality behind the act, but the consequence that it has on other wills. And so it's equally as immoral if a rock falls on someone without their consent as if you drop a rock on someone without their consent. Right.
Okay. So I'm trying to process that for a second, because I more or less actually agree with you that I'm not injecting a notion of necessarily of free will in how I see morality. I do agree with you that it's about the way that behavior impacts consciousness. But it just seems strange to me and counterintuitive to me to then include factors that aren't conscious. I mean, we can remove free will from the conversation and still retain consciousness itself as a source, right?
No, that's kind of the point. Free will doesn't matter. That was just an example. But if we think of the example of the brain tumor, clearly that's not conscious. The brain tumor doesn't have any consciousness as far as we know. So that wasn't a conscious factor that caused them to kill anybody. So that we wouldn't call moral based on your definition. But
No,
a
but
psychopath, the same thing applies. The psychopathic brain state isn't conscious either. It's just a certain way the patterns in the brain function, just like the brain tumor. And so, based on your definition, we shouldn't call psychopaths immoral either. Or any kind of murderer or thief did so because of some kind of a brain state which encouraged them to do one action which involves doing something we see as bad as opposed to another. And again, that's the brain state, which is no different than the psychopath. There's nothing conscious about it. They're just a victim of their biology. And so,
right, okay.
so if we use your definition of saying it's really the consciousness, well, there is no such thing. Consciousness is essentially an epiphenomenon. It's what you think and feel from your consciousness as a result of your subconscious brain, chemicals, upbringing, whatever. You really don't have any control over it whatsoever. And so most of what you do that would be considered immoral isn't really a conscious thing at all. It's all determined by something way before your consciousness has any interaction at all. And so when we're talking about morality, it's really not the consciousness that we're talking about.
Yeah, but wouldn't you be calling immoral or moral the consequence? Because that's not what I was trying to say. What I'm saying is that isn't our judgment on the morality or immorality of a situation dependent on the consequences of an action on consciousness?
Yes, I would say that it's all like you can't be immoral to a rock. A rock doesn't have consciousness, so whatever you do to it isn't going to be moral or immoral. It's only helping or hurting other conscious things that determines what it's moral. Yes.
So we couldn't be immoral to a rock, but I guess from what you're describing is that a rock could be immoral to us.
Nature, like the standard of nature itself would be, so immorality measures the ability for something to either harm a will or assist a will with or without consent. So if, for example, we compare one world where rocks fall on people all the time, that world is immoral compared to a world where it's impossible for rocks to fall on people without their consent. So if you can compare the two different worlds, we can say world A is more or less immoral than world B because it allows freedom of will or allows the unrestricted achievement of will, as opposed to world B, which causes many involuntary impositions of will. So we can say, I wouldn't say the rock is immoral. I'd say nature itself, that world, the laws of physics, the way it's organized is immoral because it is designed in such a way that it imposes on will more so than the other world.
Wow, that's actually quite a persuasive argument, I have to say. I think when I had heard you talk about this before, I think something hadn't quite connected in my mind. Because it still feels very counterintuitive to say that something that doesn't have consciousness, could be described as immoral. But I understand where you're coming from as far as pointing out that if what we care about is the impact on consciousness, then it doesn't really matter where the impact is coming from. The impact is what matters, right?
Right. Yeah. And I totally agree that it is counterintuitive. So, because this is a prediction of what I think future intuitions of people are going to be like. So, if we gain, like, we know from world progress that people saw it as moral to kill animals. Like, it was totally moral to kill animals. You do it to save people's lives, to feed people. We need to do that. It's a good thing. God gave us these animals to be our property or whatever. And now we start to see it as actually, killing animals, they suffer, they feel just like we do. It's kind of immoral to kill the animals. And so we are making this progress of incrementally moving the standard of what we consider to be morality more and more in a certain direction. So I think if we continue along that direction, like when all conscious beings are essentially free from involuntary imposition, that would be a stepping stone for humanity. And once we get to that point, we're not just going to stop using the terms moral and immoral. We're going to see that really what we meant by those was the things that impose on conscious beings without their consent. So I think that once we get to that point far enough in the future where conscious beings don't ever hurt each other without consent, we will probably just realize that what we mean by morality is more nuanced and actually does refer to involuntary imposition caused by anything, including worlds. And we'll be able to say this world where rocks fall on people without their consent is immoral compared to this world where they don't fall on people. And so we should try to make this world be the case because it is a more moral world. So I totally agree with you. It's very counterintuitive, but that's my prediction about what will happen to moral intuition in the future. It's not it's not meant to be intuitive right now. It's not meant to make sense. It's supposed to be something that will happen in the future based on what I understand morality to be, if I'm right.
Have you ever heard any argument for free will that has been convincing in any way, or any argument against his position that you find challenging at all?
Sort of. So free will is completely incoherent. I agree with the Sam Harris argument. Either everything is done for reasons, in which case it's determined, or it's done for no reason, in which case it's random, and that's pretty much true dichotomy, P or not P. So free will is out because it's either determined or random. Neither of those is free. But the argument that theists, that I've kind of coaxed out of theists to make them make, is that free will is kind of like a third ontological entity that kind of exists in the universe. So it's kind of like you got the natural and you got the supernatural and you got the free will stuff, and they're all separate kinds of things. And then that I kind of have a tendency to say, well, maybe that's possible. I don't know how it could be possible. Maybe that's possible. And so in that sense, I can give that one a maybe. Like that one's all right, fine. Maybe there's this third ontology of free will stuff that exists in the universe and we just don't understand it yet. But other than that, I don't think so. I think it's pretty much completely impossible.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much in agreement on the point. I'm still trying to sort of reorganize my intuitions on this, because I think I think I have similar intuitions until maybe I didn't realize that my way of looking at it logically arrives at your position in a way. Does that make sense? I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. It would be a consequence of if you take that particular stream of thinking to its extreme, like way, way, way in the future, then it would be a consequence. But it's hard to get to that point. Kind of like every, I forget what it's called, Kuhn's somehow inversions of reason. Dennett calls them strange inversions of reasoning. Kuhn calls them paradigm shifts. But like when Einstein said that space and time literally bend, all the philosophers said, no, that's complete gibberish. Space and time are philosophical concepts. How could they possibly bend? But if you took the math of what they had at the time and then drew it to its extreme at the very edges of what can be known, then you get this counterintuitive conclusion, which happens to possibly be right. And so that's kind of what I'm going for too. I mean, I agree this is a super counterintuitive result of what I think we are referring to when we talk about morality, but I think it's actually right. And it probably will be, hopefully will be a paradigm shift in the future.
I think one concern I have is that it might be a little bit too open-ended. Like how do I say this? I worry that it's what will be included in that description will be so general and so, how do I say that? So inclusive of so many different things that it might lose meaning a little bit. But I'm not necessarily certain of that. It's just sort of my reaction to what you just said in the moment. I think up until this point, I always sort of conceived it as, conscious beings impacting other conscious beings, and the result of actions on their phenomenology. And I hadn't. It still seems very, very strange to remove the conscious agent, even without free will, from the conversation and look at it as everything that just has an impact could all be said to be immoral or moral. And I think if I remember, in the context of an impact on the will, or involuntary impact on the will.
Right. So you don't remove consciousness. It has to affect consciousness, but it doesn't have to be caused by consciousness.
Right. Okay. And I think if I remember correctly, that your conversation with was it Alex Malpass?
Yep. I
think he was sort of pushing back a little bit on that end of things. But yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I've talked with Alex Malpass on his blog afterwards. So his main argument was that in my model, if a train is coming towards a person, is it immoral to push the person out of the way? My answer is yes. My answer is that if we could do it without any involuntary imposition of will, that would be the moral thing to do. Right. So if we could teleport the train, or make the person like turn into a ghost, and so they can't be hit by the train, or make the train turn into a ghost or whatever, that would be the moral thing to do. And so in the utilitarian model, kind of like what Alex Malpass subscribes to, it is moral to push the person out of the way. Whereas in mine, that's still immoral. It's just a lesser immorality than letting them get run over by the train. So because there is less involuntary imposition of will if you push them than if they get run over by the train, obviously. But that's still an involuntary imposition of will. And so we can still make it more moral. There's still a more moral option there, which is prevent any involuntary imposition of will, like what my description of the best of all possible worlds would be. And so if we could solve that case without any involuntary imposition of will, that's the moral thing to do.
Right.
And this is where my model differentiates itself from utilitarianism, in that utilitarianism, doing the lesser evil is moral. It is the good thing to do. Killing one to save 10 or whatever is moral. It's the good thing. Whereas in mine, no, it's still immoral. Like killing one is still immoral because there's still a more moral option, which is prevent any involuntary imposition of will.
If that was possible.
Yeah.
Okay. What would be an example of a world that could be, how would I say this? Outside of any imposition of will? Like, what would that look like? And even in terms of interrelational interactions, how would one go about diminishing those impositions? So what I mean is,
because you could definitely have a universe with no wills in it, with just rocks or whatever, and that would be an amoral universe.
No, I mean in terms of once consciousness is introduced, I guess I'm trying to sort of understand the specifics of how we would go about creating a society that would depend on this worldview, and so how would we?
I think I got you. So this is just the extreme. This is the starting point. So this is like the measuring stick of, if we had godlike powers, we could do whatever we want. This would be the measuring stick that we could try to go to. Now, obviously, after we know the end point, the goal, you then say, well, what are our pragmatic limitations? Like, if we take the train example of, if the train is coming and this guy's going to get run over, the moral thing to do would clearly be to make the train turn into a ghost so he doesn't hit the guy. That's the most moral thing. But I don't have that power. So what do? Given my limitations, I've got to push the guy. Now, this isn't a moral thing. It's not moral for me to push this guy. I should still apologize. I'm sorry I pushed you, dude. I was just trying to save you from the train. It's my bad. But it's still immoral. So you still got to apologize for it. It's not a good thing. Like, you shouldn't be like, dude, you should totally thank me because I just pushed you. Like, no, you're like, I'm sorry I pushed you, but I did it for some other reason. So it's essentially the same thing. You take the extreme and then work your way backwards. What are my limitations? What is the best I can do given my limitations? And then I should apologize to the person afterwards because I couldn't have done better.
And so what about situations where, trying to think, because so let's say you're trying to help an addict, and they might not want help in the moment, but looking back, they recognize that it was actually a positive thing. The same example as with the train, you wouldn't say that sort of putting them into rehab is necessarily moral, but it's more moral than letting them die.
Yeah, in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So in the case of the addict, it is true that there are many addicts who recover and say, I'm so glad I recovered. It's so glad I'm to be over with that. But there's also many cases where people don't. Like, when they recover, they just go back into it because life is so miserable that they're better off with the cocaine. Like, it's not always a moral thing to force them to go into rehab. There are many 3,000 people a year, I think, commit suicide because their lives are just that bad. And forcing them to live for longer because you think they could be happier, I think, is torture. It's just
right.
I definitely would consider that immoral. So in this case, it's kind of like hindsight bias. You gotta hope for the best and give it your best shot because you don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be. And so if saving them causes them more pain and they don't get better, I mean, that you should totally take responsibility for that. It's your fault that you caused them all of this suffering because you forced them to to get over the addiction just to continue suffering with their miserable life, and they hate it. And that's your fault. You caused them that suffering unnecessarily, kind of like forcing someone to live with disease that they can't be cured from, which just causes them more unnecessary suffering. That was definitely immoral, and you should take responsibility for that. It wasn't moral to save them in that case.
Right.
But at the same time, if you save them and their lives improve, then yeah, that was a moral thing to do for sure. But you can't know until after the fact, and so you can't know if it's going to be moral or immoral until after you do it. You just got to give it your best shot.
So I guess I'm trying to sort of narrow down what you mean by imposition on will, to make sure that, to gather what fits that definition and what doesn't. So if, for example, if someone reads a book and
let me see if I can answer that right now. So it'd be like, if you, in the best of all possible worlds, everyone would get their own universe. You could design it however you want. You get to determine all of the things that can occur in the universe and all the things that can't. So if the action is one that you put on the can list, then it's perfectly fine. If it's on the can't list, then that would be, and someone did it, that would be an involuntary imposition of your will. So,
right.
So if you could design a universe however you wanted, you put all the things that you would be allowed, that you think you would like, or that you'd allow to occur in that universe. Those are all things that would not be immoral to do. And all the things you put on the not allowed list, if someone did those would be immoral in your universe.
So someone wrote in the chat, and I want to see how you respond. Yeah, a movie is immoral because it may end differently than someone wanted it to.
No, only if it was in their universe. So if it's like my movie, I created the movie, or I own the movie or whatever, and someone changed the ending to make it something I didn't want to, yes, that would be immoral. But if it's your movie and you created it to end how you wanted it to end.
No, if you're watching someone else's movie.
Right. So there's ownership rights here. Like everyone gets their own universe. So if you have a universe and you made a movie in your universe and you just broadcasted it on the universe internet and someone watches it, since they have consented to be a part of your universe in this way, it's your property.
Okay.
Then it wouldn't be immoral because you created your movie in your universe. It would only be immoral if this was their universe and they wanted it made in a certain way and you did not do it the way they wanted you to do it.
So in this context, I know they're not different universes, but I understand the point that you're making, I think, is that if you've decided I'm going to watch the movie somebody made, this is their creation, it's only moral of them to make the movie in a way that I might not like, because I've sort of stepped into their world and decided I'm going to be a sort of a spectator to your creation.
Yep.
So it's not. So that wouldn't be an imposition on the will of the observer because they've already decided.
Yeah, they've consented. They've consented to be a part of it. Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
So it's not an involuntary imposition. You have consented to experience the thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to pop in real fast if I could and say, so Tom, I've tried to use your moral philosophy to some friends of mine. Like I'll go over and you have a beer with them and they're not philosophy type of guys, but I always, sometimes we'll get into conversations about morality. And so I'll present this type of imposition of will. And I've gotten those types of, I think the Alex Malpass example was the birthday party, I think, or something like that he presented to you.
Yeah, that one doesn't really work for the example I gave before. Like if you have your own universe and you get to put all the things you want on a list of allowed and a list of unallowed, then most people are going to put birthday parties as allowed. So that wouldn't be an involuntary imposition of will. Like maybe someone would put that on their list of not allowed. You never ever do that to me. And in that case, it would be immoral. If someone was deathly afraid of surprises, then yeah, it would probably be immoral to give them a surprise party.
Sure.
So there are some cases where it could be immoral, very rarely. Most people would probably put it on the allowed list, so it wouldn't be immoral. So Alex's example didn't really work.
Gotcha.
in that debate.
So yeah, and I've attempted to kind of steelman it to a lot of people because I think I have the same thing with Cease where it's like I'm not. A lot of it makes sense to me. But and I don't want to offend you when I say, when you hear the modal ontological argument or you hear certain arguments and you go like, there's something wrong with that. And that's kind of the vibe I've gotten. But the more that I've kind of digested it or listened to you speak about it, the more it makes sense to me. But I wanted to get your opinion. When I try to steelman it for other people, they kind of have that intuitive no. And I've given your train example as the specific example I give where you push a kid and that's an immoral action. What do you think it is that people have a problem? Is it the redefinition of morality, or what do you think the hesitance is on this kind of moral philosophy?
Yeah, it's the same thing I mentioned earlier about Einstein's time and space bending. It's so off the beaten track of what we normally consider to be morality that it's not easy to intuitively accept. Like if you imagine before you heard of relativity, someone said space and time can bend, you'd probably have that exact same feeling of, wait, that sounds dumb. Like, what are you talking about? That makes no sense. And so because it is so outside of our normal intuitions about the concept of morality, it gives us that cognitive dissonance feeling. And it's totally understandable. The question is if I'm right about morality, and this does, when we do get to a point where we can free more wills from being, when people don't voluntarily impose on people for fun anymore, we don't kill for animals for fun anymore, will we start to be like, oh, maybe this was a thing about nature and not really a thing about choices, when we know about, when we understand more about neurology and realize that, oh, really, there isn't really an immoral choice there. It's really not a conscious thing. That's really just a brain state, and we can cure it. Once we start to make those progress in neurology and in morality, we'll start to expand our view of what morality is, just like we did for space and time, is my hypothesis.
Okay, sure. Cease, you have any more questions? I'm sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I'm trying to process all of this, because I thought I had like an understanding of this perspective, and then I think you phrased it in such a way now that I think has shifted a little bit my thinking about it. And while I still feel like there's something that seems off to me, I can't quite verbalize why. And it may just be an issue of having to reorganize my intuitions. And like, I know I could ask the question of, why is imposition of will immoral in the first place? But I think it's not a question that I think ultimately makes sense, because I think it would go back to what is true about phenomenology. It's wrong because of what it results in terms of the impact on consciousness that it would have.
So the way I would interpret that would be like asking, well, why does gravity cause things to fall? Like,
it just does.
Strange question. Like, yeah, right. I mean, we're using the term gravity to describe this phenomenon. So we have these phenomenon, which we call moral intuition, moral progress. Those are the things we're calling morality. And so whatever that's doing, that's what we mean by morality. So why does that do what it's doing? Well, because it's just a fundamental part of reality in some respect, and we're just calling that morality.
Yeah, I never bought the whole, well, is goodness good type of approach. It's like, you don't know, you have lost sight of what language is at that point.
Yeah,
these are descriptors of states of being, and so there's no need for any kind of transcendental justification to call goodness good. It's just self-evident.
Yeah, that's what the word means. Like, why does it mean that? Like,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, it definitely goes back to that whole conversation earlier, is that there's this misuse of language where when people say, I don't want to talk past you, that's the biggest, that commits it the worst out of anything. Because you're like, was it the physicalism thing? I think you talked with, I don't remember who it was, but some guy kept interrupting you about it, and you were using the CD example.
Eric Hernandez?
Nah, it was on Discord. It was with Jack Strike. Yeah, sorry, I can't ever say it. But he wasn't actually really saying very much. It was some other people that were interrupting you the whole time.
Numbered trolls. Troll number 7. That's the guy.
Exactly. But yeah, I see that a lot within that. We can, if you guys don't have, or if you don't have any more questions, or you want to go more.
No, actually, I have a question.
Sure.
What does consent mean in the context of a world where it's all just determined? Like, how does consent play into that?
Just your brain acting as it is. So, for example, the fact that I like chocolate ice cream means I consent to chocolate ice cream. Like, it may be determined by my brain state. That's perfectly fine. I'm happy with chocolate ice cream. Like, if I could make my own universe right now the way I wanted it to, I'm good with that. Like, I don't care if it's determined. I like that universe. We're good. That's perfectly consensual universe.
Right.
Fair.
Mike, you want to read some questions from the chat?
Exactly what I was going to go into. We're going to do a little Q&A. If you have some more questions, we hit the hour mark. I don't want to keep too much of Tjump's time, and I'm getting hungry myself. So let's do this. All right. Can intentions themselves be immoral?
No.
Or only if? Oh, wow.
So
Sure.
yeah, it can only be immoral if it's an involuntary imposition of a will. So your intention to harm someone can't technically restrict their will in any way. Because everyone gets their own universe. You can just imagine it like, if could anything you intend affect their universe? No, it's not even possible. So it's impossible for your intentions themselves to be immoral.
But we do care about intentions in the context of protecting ourselves from potential action, right? So even though the intention itself might not be enough, it's I see that. See, this is where I think the counterintuitiveness comes in, because if I know somebody has a desire to hurt somebody, I'm not going to look at them the same as I would someone who doesn't have that intention, even if they may have not performed any particular action yet. The intention does, I think, play a role, right?
Yeah, that's because of our pragmatic limitations. We have to take intention as a potential that they're actually going to do it. And so since we don't live in the best of all possible worlds, intentions and threats and libel and those kinds of things are very real possibilities. Like someone, if they threatened me, they could very well hurt me. It's very possible for them to do so. And so we take that seriously. But if we were in the best of all possible worlds, where everybody gets their own universe, someone could just be yelling and screaming and saying they're going to murder me or whatever, completely, like they could never harm me. It's like, I forget what the term is on the internet when someone gives a death threat. If it's not actionable or something, then it's not illegal. So if they don't actually have some kind of opportunity or real intent, a real like some kind of way to actually achieve it, then it's not really a threat. So we make a distinction between threats that are viable versus threats that are just hot air.
But what
the same thing applies in the best of all possible worlds. If we lived in the best of all possible worlds, there are no intentions that could ever hurt anybody, so we'd never find them threatening. We only find them threatening because they can actually hurt us in this world pragmatically.
Yeah, but my view of somebody as immoral in that context, at least intuitively, goes beyond just what they could do, right? It's also, even if I could protect myself from whatever damage anybody might want to do, if I'm taking two people, putting them next to each other, one has the intention of harming, one doesn't. At least intuitively, it seems to make sense to say that the one who doesn't have that intention at all is still morally preferable than someone who does.
How? That doesn't really make sense to me. Like if we were like living in a world where these two people were like ghosts, they couldn't physically harm somebody, and you just saw one trying to like attack you and has all the intention to hurt you, but it's just passing through you, you'd probably find it funny. You probably wouldn't be like, oh, this person is more preferable. It'd just be a strange phenomenon. Like think about it like a lion that is trying to hurt you but can't. Like at the zoo, a lion like tries to like run up to you and eat you, and it just hits the glass. You find it entertaining. It's not like you prefer the lion that's just sitting there looking at you. There isn't really that feeling we have is only a pragmatic one due to the fact that there is a real threat there. If there's no threat, then it's just kind of silly, like looking at lions in the zoo.
You don't think that even in that context, it reveals something about what that entity is? Like, if I mean, in the context of the lion, yeah, I may be more excited or entertained by a lion roaring around, but I may prefer, I don't know, like I may be, how would I say this? If I looked at a lion acting like a cat, for example, like, laying around, like wanting to be petted or something, I may like that personality more than the lion trying, acting like it's gonna want to eat me, even if I know that it can't.
Sure, but the question is it moral or immoral? Like if that person wants to be the vicious lion and go around and eat people, is it right for you to say that person is wrong and we should stop that person, or there's something bad about that person? Well, no. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. As long as they don't actually hurt anybody, they should be allowed to roam around and be lions all they want in their own little universe cage. There's nothing wrong with that. They've done nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with them. As long as they don't hurt anybody, they should be free to express themselves in whatever way they want. I would never call them immoral for being weird or what I would say is unattractive. They should have the freedom to choose to be however they want to be in my worldview. I wouldn't call them immoral just because they were a way I wouldn't technically agree with, as long as they can't hurt anybody without consent.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if the pushback on intention really is just about sort of a pragmatic awareness of the impact it could have on the world, or if it's something just instinctively more than that. Because to me, if I think of the example you're giving, right, of everybody having their own universe, if I was imagining a pedophile in their own universe, creating whatever fantasy in their mind they could have, even if they couldn't have an impact on anybody else, instinctively I would judge them differently than I would judge anybody else who wouldn't be having those intentions, regardless of whether or not I think they're choosing to be the way they are. Because ultimately I don't really think that you can have moral blame in that kind of sense. But again, I'm not trying to I'm not really making an argument here. I'm aware of this. I'm just sort of trying to.
So to use your example, even if there was someone like, because in my world you can't create other beings, so they wouldn't be able to actually create children to harm. They could create artificial intelligences or whatever. I would see nothing wrong with that. Like if they just created artificial intelligences or pictures that they wanted to think about, and that was what they wanted to do, I see nothing immoral about that at all. The only reason it would be immoral is if they're a threat to actual children or to actual people in the world. I don't see anything wrong with them looking at pictures or imagining thought crimes. I don't see there any thought crime at all. I think that they should have the right to express themselves however they want, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And I think it would be actually immoral to try and judge them or to stop them from expressing themselves however they are, if they're not hurting anybody else.
Right. So you would say that there are sort of problem with thought crimes is only in the context of our pragmatic awareness that those thoughts could then become action.
Right, just like the intention thing. Yeah.
Would you be willing to at some point come back and discuss this further? Because
sure,
I want some time to process this a little bit more.
Sure, just send me like $50 on my PayPal. I'll come back.
Yeah, yeah. Given my, I'm a broke college student in philosophy. I don't know about that, but
well, Mike send us $50.
Yeah, I'll work something out.
But
I think I'd pay $50 to listen to more of this conversation. So
that'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, is there anything else you guys wanted to touch on before I go to another question real fast?
No, you can go ahead.
Is that your real background or a digital background?
Oh man, that's real, man. I'm loaded.
Those are some nice screens there. I like that. Screens.
It's not, but I do have one thing that's impressive to my left that I think, since you're a video game guy, you might appreciate.
Mortal Kombat cab.
Oh,
that's the actual freaking thing. You have wow.
Oh yeah. There's MK1, 2, and 3.
How did you even get that in your house? Like you had to carry
that's a story. It was me and one other person, and these guns. They got them up, but no, I had one of my friends, like a state championship in wrestling. Help me get him up. I'm sure he's actually watching right now, and he's just sitting there like, "Fuck you, Mike," because he actually ended up ripping his pants on the way. Right, but we basically went. Long story short, I called him over and I was like, "Yo, I got this thing. I need help." And then he came over, and it's originally an MK4, so it had Quan Chi on the side. So he comes over and he's just like, "What the fuck is that?" And I'm like, "Well, it's an arcade cabinet. I'm gonna do some work to it. I just need to get it upstairs." And so the original plan was to like put it on its back and slide it up the stairs. And I didn't realize it was 450 pounds. So that step immediately didn't work. And so we went one at a time. And I took the front because I said to him, I was like, you're a bigger guy. If it falls, at least I can get out of the way. But I'll probably want it to take me down with me because my roommate, it's going to do so much damage. The thing's going to be destroyed. I'm going to owe a lot of money, and I'll probably want to be dead anyway. So I'll just let it just take me out, But we ended up getting it up here, and every time I talk to him, he's like, when you move, I'm not helping you move that thing. And so I got to figure that out. But
yeah, I actually have a similar story. I got a pool table from my neighbors. I helped them move out of the house, and they couldn't take the pool table with them, so they just gave it to me for free. So I called my friend from a few doors down, like, "Hey, can you help me carry this up some stairs, like a few houses down, and then down some stairs?" He's like, "Yeah, I can help you. Oh, by the way, it weighs like 500 pounds. It's made of like marble." So yeah, we did the thing where we slid it down the stairs, and the entire side of it, where the finish of the wood just completely shaved off, because it's so heavy, and carrying it up and down the stairs is crazy.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, cease.
No, I do. Before we get to more of the comments, I do have a question that I just thought of. Is how would we evaluate? How would we evaluate one imposition of will as worse or better than another? How would we quantify that?
Paper cuts are less immoral than gunshots, essentially. We just calculate how much you want or don't want something, and then, like, if you want to die, then obviously it's not an imposition to euthanize you. Assisted suicide isn't immoral if it's voluntary. But if you don't want to die, you don't want to suffer, and someone gives you a paper cut, and that's clearly not as bad as if someone shot you with a gun. So we can use essentially the well-being suffering measure. Like, if you don't want suffering, more suffering is more immoral.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
You're
Mike, you're muted.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Sounds like that's something I would do. So I'm going to go through some of the questions here a little briefly. If you want to spend time on them, no worries. I just want to respect everybody's time. So I'm going to go ahead with, if I skipped one in the comments, I'm sorry. Like, bear with me, guys. Question for Tom. I think this has already been asked. How do you have consent without freedom of the will?
Yeah, so you don't need freedom of will. It's just your brain acting as your brain. So the fact that I like chocolate ice cream is my consent to chocolate ice cream. I don't care if it's determined or not. It's still consensual. And so if I was able to create my own universe right now, just using my current brain state with no free will, that would be a consensual universe. It doesn't need to be completely free for it to be consensual. Consent is just your brain and desires acting themselves.
Right.
Was it a goat?
Yeah, no, that was some fantasy football update. So yeah, let me go. Why is the imposition of will immoral?
That's the conclusion based off of the evidence. So we look at moral intuition, moral progress, which are the phenomenon of morality. It's like we're looking at gravity. We see stuff fall. The stuff falling is gravity. And so if we look at moral intuition, moral progress, and we try to plot out, well, what is the commonality? What is the principle that we get to when we see the pattern in these things? I think the principle that describes that pattern is involuntary imposition of will. So the phenomenon that we are talking about when we're talking about morality is moral intuition and moral progress. And the principle that seems to describe those phenomena the best is involuntary imposition of will is bad. Kind of like the principle that describes gravity the best is that stuff falls, or whatever Newton's complicated mathematical formula is.
And I guess you're also, I think the grounding is phenomenology, essentially. It's like we can observe, it's immoral because of what it does to consciousness.
Right. That would be like what we feel is immoral, definitely. But I would say that the point of the question is, like, what is it that ontologically grounds that feeling? And I think the thing that grounds that feeling is whatever is causing the moral intuition of moral progress. That's the real grounds of what it is morality. What is grounding morality? Why is one thing immoral and one thing not? It's whatever is grounding moral intuition, moral progress. And I think the description of that thing, whatever it is involuntary imposition of will is bad.
Right.
All right. I'm gonna skip some questions because I feel like some of them were already answered. But another question: would you be imposing on God's will whenever you argue that God is immoral and say that God should have done things differently?
No. So every will has consent over itself and its universe, essentially. So you couldn't impose on someone else's will by your words, just like you couldn't impose on someone else's will by your intentions. Your own words, your own thoughts, your own intentions, those can't be immoral on their own. You can't impose on someone else's will when you're exercising your own. So if I went into God's universe and like just smacked God upside the head and said, "You monster," that would be an involuntary imposition on God's will. But me saying that God is a moral monster would not be, because I have ownership over my own will, and I did not consent to being his property. If I consented to being his property, then that could be immoral.
I gotta ask, have you read Levinas?
Yes, the best of all possible worlds. His definition is dumb, though. He thinks this is the best of all possible worlds, which is dumb.
Yeah, right. No, because some of what you're saying reminds me a little bit of this idea that when we capture and sort of objectify the other, even just through our gaze, it kind of reminds me of this imposition of will that you're describing in a way. Like it just sort of reminds me of that a little bit. I think it's although I much prefer your approach to the conversation.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think
just
there's lots of parallels between lots of different philosophies. I think the one I like the most is Buddha, who says, "Save all suffering beings everywhere." I think that's a really good analogy.
right.
This question, what's more of, I guess, a statement, but I'm going to pull it up because I already know that Tom has heard this probably 1,000 times, and it'd be good to get an answer on that. So, we impose our will on children all the time. My toddler wants to go out and play in the street, and I prevent him from doing so.
Right. So that's a pragmatic involuntary imposition of will. So it's immoral but it's justified because if you don't do it, they're going to have a much worse involuntary imposition of will. So like if you don't stop your kid from running into the street, they're going to get hit by the car. Like the train example, if you let the guy get hit by the train, that's more immoral than stopping them than pushing them over. But pushing them over is still immoral. It's just a much less immoral action than letting them get hit by the train. But there is a more immoral option there. You can say, well, if I could make the car turn into a ghost or whatever and pass through my kid and not be harmed, well, then there's no reason to stop them from running into the street. They could just run into the street all they want and never get hurt. And so it would no longer be justified to force them to not run into the street. And so it's because there is a more moral option, you can know that that's not the moral choice. It's not moral to stop your kid from running into the street. It's just the least immoral thing you can do given your limitations.
And I want to see your follow-up on any agent that doesn't have morals. His follow-up, I'm sorry. Any agent that doesn't have morals has no preferred state of being, so it has nothing by which to differentiate any of its possible actions and just turns into a random unintelligent agent.
What? So we have these things called psychopaths. Psychopaths have no morals, but they're still agents. They still have consciousness and they should still be treated with like respect. Like if we could give a psychopath their own universe, we should do so. We shouldn't just throw them in prison or treat them as rocks just because they don't have a moral compass. Like the morality isn't required for consciousness or moral or like being an agent. We can definitely think of animals that probably don't have a moral compass, like lizards, which don't have the right part of the brain. That doesn't mean we shouldn't respect them or it's totally okay to kill them and make them suffer just because they don't have morals. Mm-hmm. Morals is just a subset of consciousness. It's like all roses are flowers, not all flowers are roses. All things with morals are conscious, but not all conscious things have morals. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't respect them. Morals isn't the criteria for agency. Consciousness is. If it has consciousness, we should treat it with respect, regardless of whether or not it has morals.
Mm-hmm. Cool. 2 more questions. I might have. I'm sorry, guys, if I fumbled on this one. Did I already ask or put this up there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I asked it earlier.
That's right. Last one. Is it immoral to tell someone about something they never heard of before? I pretty much think this is a very similar.
Spoilers. But yes, if they say not to, no, if they don't. So like if they say, don't tell me spoilers, you asshole, I haven't watched the movie yet, then yes, it would be immoral to tell them the spoilers. If they haven't said that, or if they haven't made it clear that they don't want that, then no, it would not be immoral.
Cool. All right. Anything else from you guys? I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I appreciate you coming on, Tom, but I want to make sure that we get maybe any statements out or anything you want to plug.
Yeah, check out my channel, youtube.com/tjump. JMike has an OnlyFans, link in my Discord.
I do.
Do you guys mind if I copy this on my channel, of course?
Oh, of course.
I would love that. Yeah,
go ahead.
Cool. That'd be great.
Hey, thanks again so much for coming, and I hope you'll be back sometime.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Happy to come back whenever.
Yeah, this was a really cool for me. A lot of atheists, they look up to like the Dillahunties and the Four Horsemen. I never really got into those that much. I'd watch Hitchens and those things, but the two people that I look up to the most in this are in a broadcast with me right now. So it's really cool for me to be a part of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also Tjump.
You're talking about like Murder Shed, Stephen Oz, right? Those two guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was on your last thing I want to say is I was on your Discord. Someone in Angel Luna. Do you know who he is? He's a huge fan of yours. He posts your TikTok a lot. I think I'm saying,
maybe not. I don't
it's
know
like
exactly.
X Angel Luna X, I think is his username. But he sent me something on the Discord, and someone was referencing me on there. So I went in there to check what it out, and I saw it was your Discord. There's a flat earther on there, and I didn't know if he was a Poe. I asked him how he accounts for an equatorial amount on his flat plane, and he just kept giving me a lot of non sequiturs. Do you know of any Poes that are on there? I didn't know if I was getting trolled. I just kind of want to clarify because this guy was pretty dumb.
Well, I know I definitely have trolls.
Sure.
I don't know if they're like which law it is. Is Poe's law? Is it Poe's law? The one it's inability to distinguish between sarcasm and people who are serious on the internet or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's genuine or not. I definitely have a lot of very strange people who post on arguments on there, like the guy who thinks shapes and colors are prove God exists. That was pretty weird.
Yeah, it was probably the easiest dismantling of a flat earther I'd ever had, and I was like, well, I'm glad I documented that on Tjump's page. But anyway, guys, we appreciate everyone for listening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and again, if you haven't already, we're a much smaller channel, but if you haven't heard of Tjump's channel, go subscribe. I think he's getting close to 6,000, somewhere around like 5,500, somewhere around there. So go help him out. Get to that Jay Dyer level of 40 whatever thousand that he has unjustly.
Yeah. Need to break IP, get the 200K.
Yeah, and apologies to Pasta Mike. We were going to have you on again, but we ran out of time. Hopefully we'll figure that out. Guys, peace out.
See you guys.